From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Residents and Wichita City Council members are raising concerns over the conditions at one apartment complex that some are calling horrific. From changes to education to water conservation, several bills were signed into law this week by the governor. What that means for you at home. But first, the governor also busy vetoing several bills as the legislature gets ready to come back. So what are the chances of an override? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. With the Kansas legislature set to return next week for its veto session, Governor Laura Kelly has given it plenty of work to do. The governor vetoed several bills this week, from trans health care and abortion regulations to child care regulations. And it sets the stage for several votes in the House and Senate to try to overturn those rejections. It's been a busy week for Kansas Governor Laura Kelly. As of Thursday, she has vetoed 8 different bills. She has vetoed several different bills this week. Some of those vetoes include a bill that aimed to alleviate the current shortages of child care workers. Governor Kelly said that she was vetoing the bill because it would, quote, would reverse the progress we've made towards the goal, loosening safety requirements for child care centers and preventing the state from being responsive to individual communities' needs. Another veto was of a bill that would have removed the grace period on advance ballots to be returned. The large bulk of the vetoes, though, having to deal with transgender issues, including gender-affirming care, and a bill defining what biological sex could enter what bathrooms or other facilities. Kelly saying, by stripping away rights from Kansans and opening up the state to expensive and unnecessary lawsuits, these bills would hurt our ability to continue breaking economic records and landing new business deals. She added, I'm focused on the economy. Anyone care to join me? Now, here to address this and other issues facing lawmakers this week, we've got State Representative and Wichita Republican Susan Humphreys. Thank you for being with us. Yep. State Senator and also from Wichita, Olathe Faust-Cadeau. And finally, Travis Mounts, owner of the Times Sentinel newspapers here in South Central Kansas. Welcome to you all here. And so there's a lot of vetoes to track, a lot of work this week. And so we'll first start with this kind of a lot of ground to cover with some of these transgender bills. Okay. And Representative Humphreys' leadership has talked a lot about making these a priority when we come back for veto session this week. What's kind of the feeling with the efforts to overturn some of these vetoes? Okay, so I think first of all, we should note that we did overturn the Fairness in Women's Sports veto. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing after 3 years, after trying for 3 years. But a couple of the ones that she also vetoed actually do have a veto-proof majority, and that would be the school overnight. So we passed a bill that said in schools overnights that because of an issue that happened in Eudora, that children on field trips and whatnot, they need to be separated. And then the other one was in county jails. It had to do with making sure that when the sheriff places folks in county jails, they are placed according to their biological sex. And those both passed with a veto-proof majority, so I think we'll be able to get those across the line. And they make common sense, I think, to most Kansans. I know the gender-affirming care one was a lot closer. I think it was 70 votes, so short of that veto-proof majority. Is that one that you think may have to wait for another session? I think that's going to be up to the leadership to decide, but I have already had a few people tell me that had voted no. That happened at 3 in the morning, and I did carry that bill, and it was a little bit a surprise to some of the folks. We hadn't had a lot of notice about it in the House, at least. And so I've already had some people tell me that they've changed their vote. They did research and they see what's going on, and they understand that there's a huge group of people who are detransitioning, and they're concerned about the health of minors and what's going on there. So it's going to be up to the leadership to decide for sure what they want to do about it. And kind of on the other side of the Senator, these votes have been very close. And she mentioned the Fairness Women's Sports Act. That was one vote, and actually a Democratic representative was kind of the swing vote on that one. What is Democratic leadership kind of looking at when it comes to these vetoes, specifically with these transgender bills? Well, I'm going to say I've got a lot of phone calls and emails and text messages from individuals that are asking me to sustain the governor's veto. And I look at it, you know, what comes to mind is discrimination, safety, and what's some are advocating for, others aren't. And so
It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. It's going to depend on how many people get to the legislators to sustain the governor's veto.
And I think that's an interesting aspect. I know you guys have had 2 weeks off kind of between this and last session. That's something lawmakers have talked to me about. It gives you a chance to hear from your constituents and kind of rethink a lot of this stuff. What has been kind of, has the last 2 weeks allowed you two to kind of look over this and kind of have a fresh perspective on some of these bills?
My position is still the same, and especially when I get the personal phone calls from individuals that are saying, you know, how it affects them personally. And they are sharing with you their personal experience. And so my vote will still be the same as it was.
Yeah, and same. And I would just say, especially with the gender services for youth, I think there's even been some more research that's come out in these last 2 weeks that I've been studying. And so if we do try to override the governor's veto, I think there is some new information on that may sway a few folks.
And a different topic that may come up, Travis, I know, was when it comes to child care regulations. That was one the governor vetoed because she felt it made things too unsafe. Just from some of the reporting that your newspapers have done, what do you feel is like the biggest issues when it comes to addressing child care needs? Because that's been such a struggle in a lot of the area.
It is a challenge, especially for you know, a lot of our footprint. We've got really small towns. You know, there's minimal opportunities for child care. It's always a battle. I remember when my kids were little, it was like, what are we going to do with them? It's really difficult to find a spot. You know, fewer regulations are a great idea right up until they aren't. You know, how far can you go before you open the door for new problems? And at what point do you regret having gone that far? And so there's no easy answers for something like this. You know, we need more quality child care, but if we're going to make more child care available but lower the quality, are we really benefiting kids, or are we putting them at risk, you know, in an effort for expediency to a solution to a hard problem?
Okay. And real quick, for our lawmakers here, is there any sort of, I know with that bill being vetoed, any sort of other thoughts about maybe what next session may look like when it comes to child care?
Well, here's what I'm looking at. In my district, a lot of African-American daycare centers have been closed for minor reasons. I just toured with a couple of lawmakers yesterday a Kids World daycare center where they are expanding to have more children. I've actually had 2 other daycare centers in my district that were closed for simple little things like the toilet paper, the roll was empty, and so they were wrote up for that. And so infractions, small infractions are adding up. I think we should not lower the standards for safety and qualification of caring for our children. I think that we should look at some of the requirements within KDHE and you know, come up with the 21st century on some of these rules and regs, but we shouldn't lower the standard.
Absolutely. Now, on the other side of things, more positive aspect, the governor also signed several bills into law this week, including new funding and regulations for water consumption, a pair of education bills, and a bill that would remove the statute of limitations on child sex crimes. Now, that's an effort that has been pushed in the State House for the last few years. After months of lobbying through news conferences,
I began telling other coaches about my abuse the following summer. One of them had also been sexually assaulted by David Byrd. While most of them were supportive, no one reported my abuse.
And legislative hearings.
To be honest, I was really angry that something that happened to me as a child had a limitation on it. I felt I was being punished for not reporting sooner.
Monday, survivors of child sex abuse saw their work pay off when Governor Kelly signed a bill that eliminates the statute of limitations for criminal charges on such crimes.
I think from here on, people will recognize that that is an option that they may have as adults to be able to disclose that information.
Diana Shun with the Child Advocacy Center of Sedgwick County says having a law like this is important because oftentimes it takes people decades to be able to disclose what happened to them.
Many children will never disclose their abuse at all, and so an adult doesn't have the opportunity to step in and try to provide safety for them if they're not talking about what abuse may have occurred to them.
The bill also extends the window for civil charges to be filed in child sex abuse cases. Shun doesn't expect this law to lead to a flurry of lawsuits. She says it just gives survivors another option.
Whether that's a civil or a criminal side of going to court. That takes a lot of courage for victims to want to get into a room and be able to talk about the difficult and trying situations that they have been put into.
No, we just talked about a fight over some future vetoes. This was a bill that passed out of both chambers unanimously. I know a lot of these women had been lobbying the State House all year long. Kind of when you first saw this bill, First Representative Humphreys, kind of what first came to mind as something that this needed to be passed?
Yeah, so I mean, it started at the very beginning of the session, and it took a while for all the sides to come together and to decide what is this bill going to actually look like. And I was so happy when it got passed and the way that it was passed unanimously. I had some of the survivors sitting in my office, and I heard their stories, and very compelling. And I think we came up with a bill, and both sides, I say sides, but really it was more just juggling what people thought was going to be the most important aspects, and they came up with something that everyone could agree with and were happy with, and I think it was a great outcome.
Oh, absolutely. So the main sponsor, Senator Cindy Holscher, and Senator Reddy, on the Senate floor, they told their personal stories. And of course, it was really effective coming into the Capitol every day and seeing the ladies sitting there. But I want to say I 100% support this legislation. We do know that people get the strength and courage to tell their stories later. However, I and some other lawmakers, the current law before this one goes into effect was part of the statute of limitations law that we have currently. So in listening to those stories years ago and then hearing more currently is just more reason for this bill to have passed bipartisan votes.
And another bipartisan effort was the water bills this year, specifically about $35 million into the state water fund, things like that. Travis, you cover a lot of areas, including Cheney and Cheney Reservoir, also what brings the water down here to Wichita. How important are some of these water regulations? Is this something that a lot of readers in your area are really paying attention to?
I'm not sure people are really paying that much attention yet. It's going to become a bigger and bigger issue as time goes by because the water problems are just going to continue. It's going to take more work, it's going to take money, it's going to take sacrifice. I think a lot of the problems that we're going to face, especially in the western half of Kansas, are going to really resemble, what we see in places like the Central Valley in California. I go out there a lot to see family. I've been through the Central Valley. There's actually a lot of similarities in between, that rural lifestyle there and our rural lifestyle here. There's just not enough water for everything that we do. Part of it is that in both places we're growing crops that really shouldn't be there. We created water to do this and changed what the environment really, would allow, and now we're running into problems with that, and it's going to create huge issues because the food that comes out of Kansas, the food that comes out of California, both of those feed the nation in a lot of ways, and everybody will feel the impact.
Absolutely. I know we even had a reporter at Cake talk about some of the water levels at Cheney Lake recently and how that's even getting a little bit lower than average and all that. It's an issue that's affecting not just agriculture, but a lot of different aspects in the area. Another issue that's affecting, a very specific group, but one that can be kind of broadened out. There's an apartment complex in South Wichita facing scrutiny from residents and local government officials for poor living conditions. So what can be done to resolve those problems? Cake's Pilar Pedraza dug into that.
For those who live at Emory Gardens, it may seem like nothing much is happening right now. Even some of you have been so frustrated, you've asked us why no one's simply condemned the building at this point. The city says that's because Kansas has strong protections for property owners. We checked state statute, and it does give cities like Wichita the power to set deadlines for repairs and, if missed, to order the owner to show up for a hearing to explain what's going on and hear complaints directly from tenants. But it also allows cities to immediately tear down a building if it is, quote, in such condition as to constitute an immediate hazard requiring immediate action to protect the public. Because many of the tenants in Emory Gardens told us they're using federal grants to help pay for the apartments and can't afford to move, we reached out to the federal government's Department of Housing and Urban Development as well, that's HUD, to see if it was involved in this investigation. A spokesperson told me Emory Gardens is no longer a HUD-insured or assisted project, but added it's monitoring this ongoing investigation. We do expect to hear more from HUD as the investigation continues. Meanwhile, we also reached out to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, trying to figure out its role in all this. No one has responded to our calls and emails at this time.
Now, a lot of these issues deal with city code, but I think there's a bigger conversation at the state level. I know Councilman Johnson, Brandon Johnson, we talked to him. He's your neighbor. He's talked to us about wanting to come out to Topeka and talk about rules when it comes to out-of-state ownership of apartments and disclosing ways for people to contact them. Is that something you think the legislature may be willing to take up and at least examine the issue?
Absolutely. So I serve on the Senate Local Government Committee, and we've addressed some of these issues in the past, although it's sometimes it's hard to have your state rules and regs versus local. But this time I think we've got to get on the same page. I want to say first, a lot of people have been living like this for years, but they are afraid to say something because they need a place to live. And we need to hold those out-of-state landlords accountable. Something has to be done. This looked like, when I saw it on the news, it looked like a third world country type of situation, like war. It was just terrible.
And what are some of the actions the State House can look at when it comes to this type of things, when it is such a local issue on a lot of this effort?
Right. I think the main thing is beginning to be its awareness. And so when people understand this is what's happening, and even what's been happening for a long time. At the moment, we have very strong the landlord-tenant laws are very strong property rights laws in Kansas, and I'm not opposed to that. But I totally agree holding accountable those landlords, because there are also laws that say you don't live in squalor. There are legal remedies, but again, people need to feel comfortable. I think we could, I don't know that it's a legislative fix, but could it be, legal services that help people speak up and be able to actually have a voice and go to court over some of these things? I would be very much in favor of that.
But we've given landlords tax breaks and incentives for years to fix up their rental properties, and there's no oversight to see if they're really doing that. I hear from constituents that nobody came out to fix to insulate their home. They have high utility bills, and they live in rundown areas, and perhaps locally the city could have an inspector go out and check to see if that landlord deserves that rebate.
Yeah. And I know this also speaks to a bigger issue. Some of the residents we spoke with talked about they couldn't find another apartment just because there isn't much of a housing inventory. Travis, that's not just a Wichita metro area issue, is it? It's kind of Central County and beyond. Housing is needed everywhere.
That has really become a national issue. The housing crisis based on costs that we've seen on the coasts has come here, and it's impacting everybody, whether you're buying high-end houses or you're just trying to find the most basic apartment to live in. It's just very, very hard to do. Some of it is about availability. Some of it, I think, is just about opportunistic people taking advantage of those who don't have a way to defend themselves. We need a multifaceted approach to this. We need better legislation. We need better enforcement. We need better support services. There is not a single ticket to fix this situation.
Yeah. Now, we've gone hyper-local. Let's broaden out to a little bit of national news. While several Republicans nationwide are lining up to challenge former President Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, one prominent candidate is not, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. With the 2020 midterms far in the rearview mirror, it's time to start looking ahead to the 2024 presidential election. The Republican primary is expected to be a large field, but one name not in there is former Secretary of State and Kansas Representative Mike Pompeo. Pompeo announced his decision on Twitter, saying, quote, "It is simplest and most accurate to say this decision is personal. The time is not right for me and my family." Now, I know former Secretary of State had been touring around with this book, had gone to some events like CPAC and all that stuff. Was this a surprise that he actually did not announce that he was going to run?
I don't think so. I think most folks weren't really expecting that. When the news comes out that maybe a big portion of his book sales were internal, which happens with a lot of folks on the left and the right. When you're buying your own book to get on a bestseller list, that tells you a lot about what your actual grassroots support is. I think the Republican Party is still Donald Trump's until it's not. And Mike Pompeo just wasn't going to be the guy to displace him from that.
He did leave the door open a little bit. He said he's only 59. He could run again in future years. You know, is he someone who you think Kansans could actually identify with as someone who's represented this area and has been involved with Kansas politics?
I think he has shown to be an exceptional leader in many ways. I think he doesn't have the U.S. the recognition, the name recognition, even though he was the Secretary of State and the Director of the CIA. So I think there could be a time, but I will say I think his knowledge of foreign affairs is outstanding, and that's something that we really are going to need to be taking a look at. And so I appreciate Mike Pompeo, and I hope that we do see him on some level.
And I think this also sets the stage really for 2024 to be a rematch of what 2020 was and all that. I know some people have that exact same reaction, Representative. Is there kind of a feeling that people are already feeling fatigued, you know, going into election that's still 2 years away almost?
Oh, well, I think people are more energized, actually. And with some of the legislation that we've passed, like the presidential primary issue, that was one bill that both parties supported. I think it will create better voter turnout.
And I think that's kind of the key with a lot of this stuff, is just to get the most people out there and try to at least have an engaged voter base when it comes to a lot of this.
Totally, and the governor signed that bill, so yeah.
Yeah, one of the few bills that we can talk about that actually was signed this week. And now, you know, we kind of, as we get onto this, the legislature does head back to Topeka this week. There are several other items that we have not talked about today beyond the vetoes and the bills that were signed, including education funding and funding for fentanyl test strips. And so we're going to keep this at the table. First, for our lawmakers, what are some of the things you think people should be paying close attention to outside of some of the vetoes this week when it comes to this session?
Well, I just want to say real quickly, some of the things that were left on the table that I wish we would have moved forward with, but you know, it's not over until the fat lady sings, actually. So Senate Bill 21 would have helped a lot of people, a holiday sales tax on school supplies. That was left on the table. For me, I want everybody to, I want to be clear on this. I've already addressed the suspended driver's license bill. I'm trying to address now the revoked driver's license issue. I still didn't get my Crown Act yet. I'm still fighting for that. And Senate Bill 118, it's very important, and I'll have to reintroduce that again next year. And we both, I think, Representative Humphreys agreed on the maternal mortality bill, some legislation to help save the lives of mothers and their children. So that was left on the table. But, you know, I don't have that crystal ball. So what does it take in the Senate to override? I think we've got to have, is it 24 or 27? So it just depends. I know a lot of negotiation is still going on right now. So it's just going to be anybody's guess.
Representative, anything that you think people should look forward to?
Well, I also think we did not get finished with our K-12 funding. So we still have that bill in front of us. And I think there are some really good things in that. I feel like it was really a compromise in that it was fully funding special education, and then it also had some education freedom. So for parents who don't believe that the public schools are serving them adequately, and I've heard some stories, and even in our own family, there were certain reasons why the public school was not the best choice for some of our kids. And so I'd like to give, I think it's a compromise in that we're fully funding, but we're also taking on actually the governor's KEEP Act, which was helping students that need a little extra help. And so we're just making that a little bit more robust. And then just another veto, the Born Alive Act, that I feel like that's something that we really do need to take a look at. I don't understand how people could not agree that when a child is born alive after a botched abortion, why they would not want to be able to give them life-saving care as the same as if the same gestational age as a child they would do normally. So I would really like to override that. The abortion pill reversal notice, which we don't have to go into detail. I mean, I'm happy to, but I think that's really important to give women a choice. That's all about women's having the right to know and giving them a choice. So there's, you know, a lot of others, and then we'll have to do the omnibus bill. Yeah. So, yep.
I have to say on the abortion pill, I have to say, I don't think it's fair to put the pressure on that physician. once that woman has made her decision to whatever medical procedure or not to have, I don't think we should penalize or criminalize that physician and hold him accountable for what's between a woman and her doctor.
I know the abortion issue has been a big one. We obviously had the vote last summer, Travis.
Yeah, I don't think Kansas came out as right as everybody thought, both on the right and the left. You know, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists on this topic basically says that it forces doctors to give patients inaccurate information. And that becomes a dangerous precedent, I think, anytime that we've got a body of legislators who are not trained in medicine telling trained medical professionals how to do their jobs.
And I'm sorry, I've got to go back to that, because there's many medical professionals that say, yes, this does work. They're not saying you have to do this, but it's giving women a choice. And even one of the pregnancy resource centers here in Wichita, 3 babies have been saved using the protocol that we're talking about in that. So it's not junk science. It's not inaccurate. There are certainly
the college would tend to disagree with that. There were no control groups done on the studies that tend to be referenced, and a control group is your most elementary part of doing a study.
How do you do a control group of abortion-minded women who may or may not want to choose to do that protocol? It's a little bit different than other studies we might do. But I think what the facts are is 4,000 babies across the U.S. have been saved with women who decide that they don't feel comfortable after taking the first pill. 4,000 lives. That's facts.
And I'll say I didn't get a lot of calls about this. When I come home on this spring break for legislators, people are still struggling just to pay their utility bills. People are struggling just to make ends meet. I was happy that we passed the dyslexia bill. That was really good.
Yes.
We've been trying to do that for many years, and I think that will help a lot of children that we represent.
And yeah, just speak a little bit about that. I know that gives some extra help for children with dyslexia and all that. That was one I know the Senate President very strongly himself came out with and all this. Really.
Yeah, totally. And we were a little bit late to the party. Other states had already done some, and so I'm really glad that Kansas came around about that.
Okay, well, I believe that is about all the time we have here for today. So we do want to thank, again, all of our guests, Susan, Olathe, and Travis. Thank you so much for a great conversation today. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Wichita Eagle, and Cake for sharing with us their materials. We'd love to continue the conversation with you on social media. Just look for @PBS Kansas both on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. For now, stay safe and have a great weekend.